Tram view of the Ukraine conflict. Probably all of us have been subjected, at some point in life, to this thought experiment called the trolley dilemma. Essentially, a hypothetical situation, but meant to reveal, through the choices it allows, how we approach ethically and morally the lives of our fellows and the philosophy behind that guides us. The terms in which the situation is described sound as follows. Imagine you see a tram moving at speed but without anyone in command. Suddenly, you notice that in front of the tram, on the same tracks, there are 5 people tied up, unable to move. If you do nothing, the tram will continue on its path and will kill the 5 people. You can pull a lever to change the tram's direction onto another line, but on that line, another person is tied up. So, you have 2 options. 1. Do nothing and the tram will continue on its current path, killing the 5 people. 2. Pull the lever to change the tram's direction onto the alternative path, thus killing only 1 person. The subject is thus faced with a difficult choice that involves grave consequences, regardless of the decision taken. This situation highlights the difficulty of making moral choices in situations where ethical principles come into conflict and where whatever you do, the consequences are severe. The utilitarian principle would assume one course of action, the deontological a completely different one. Utilitarians would choose to change the direction of the tram to save 5 people, even if it means sacrificing the life of 1 person. The decision is justified by the fact that it saves more lives, thereby reducing the total loss. Deontologists would not change the direction of the tram because they consider the active action of harming an innocent person immoral. Doing nothing and allowing the tram to continue its course would be preferable because the subject would not directly contribute to the harm produced. In the case of deontologists, the action would be immoral, but an action not, exactly the opposite of utilitarians. Hence the dilemma. It may seem like a hypothetical situation with which we could never encounter in life, but reality proves us completely otherwise, I say. The war of Russia with Ukraine can be put in analogy with such a situation and analyzed from a moral perspective. And here we are in a dilemma that sheds light on the difficulty of making moral decisions when human lives are involved. Peace is the alternative in which 0 human lives are lost. But once the war breaks out, essentially the choice is between an outcome in which a larger or smaller number of human lives are lost. We start from the presumption, which we consider unanimously accepted, that the general good implies that people's lives are more important and more precious than territories. Otherwise, the argumentation from which we start is weak from the outset. In this war, too, the sidelines disputes are between utilitarians, who seek to maximize the general good, and deontologists, who focus on following moral principles regardless of consequences. From a utilitarian perspective, the objective would be to minimize the loss of human lives. In this context, it might be considered a greater good for Ukraine to give up certain territories to end the conflict quickly, thus saving a larger number of lives and diminishing damages. From the deontological perspective, where the principle of respecting national sovereignty and opposition against armed aggression is central, It is supported that helping Ukraine in its defense against the Russian invasion is indefinitely morally justified, even if it involves the constant loss of human lives and the destruction of the country, because only thus are the fundamental principles of justice and autonomy defended. So, in practice as in theory, utilitarians take into account the greater good in general, while deontologists remain entrenched in respecting moral principles regardless of consequences. Deontologists are somehow like judges who judge by the letter of the law, not its spirit. For utilitarians, a quick and peaceful resolution of the conflict, even one that would involve giving up territories to Russia, might be considered preferable to save lives. In contrast, the deontological approach supports the endless resistance of Ukraine against the invasion as being morally necessary, regardless of the human and material costs, because it defends fundamental principles such as national sovereignty and international law. Certainly, the publicly declared motivations of those who support the continuation of the conflict may have a hidden agenda, unknown to us, and they and those who cover them have no reason to expose themselves. Similarly, even those who advocate for peace may be guided by their own interests, which are not necessarily moral. However, a fundamental argument remains. While peace can bring the salvation of human lives, war, by its nature, leads only to destruction and loss of lives. In this context, loaded with suffering and pain, the choice between a utilitarian approach and a deontological one is not just a theoretical exercise, as it would be in the trolley dilemma. The decision carries with it hard and very real consequences: the saving or loss of human lives. Therefore, this choice fundamentally defines you as a person. It reveals whether your values are more anchored in pragmatism toward a greater good from an imperfect situation you are facing, even at the expense of territorial, political, and economic interests you are entitled to have. Or perhaps you prefer an unwavering loyalty to eternal moral principles, meaning you make a choice that places justice and ethics ahead of the cost of minor human lives, which you believe can be sacrificed on the altar of high principles of integrity and national sovereignty written about in books. Especially when those who must be sacrificed on the altar of your high deontological principles are others, and not you or yours. Taking a position in this conflict is not just a decision. It is a reflection of what you truly value, what you are willing to sacrifice, and the type of person you choose to be and who represents you. Each of us must assume this choice and live with its consequences.